a teenage girl forced into hiding.
Her diary became for us the most detailed and personal account of the Holocaust.
The story of Anne Frank, from the perspective of modern-day teens.
The beginning of World War II. World War II began in 1939. It involved the majority of the world's nations. The great powers eventually combined to form two major opposing sides, the Allies and the Axis. It was the most widespread war in history, and included more than 100 million people.
Adolf Hitler was named Chancellor on January 30th, 1933. President Hindenburg believed that Hitler could lead Germany out of its economic crisis following World War I. Jews were discriminated against because Hitler believed that Nazis were racially superior. He also unfairly blamed the Jews for Germany's misfortunes following the loss of World War I.
Jews started going into hiding because the Nazis would capture them. Often Jews were sent to concentration camps, which led to their nearly inevitable death. Concentration camps were a leading example of the Nazis' control. Captured people were kept in extremely harsh conditions and had no rights. An estimated 11 million people died during the Holocaust, and about 6 million of them were Jews, 1.1 million of them children.
Anne's life before hiding. Anne Frank was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1929.
She, her mother, and her sister Margot lived with her grandmother in Aachen, Germany, from the summer of 1933 through the beginning of 1934. During this time, her father Otto was searching for a new house in Amsterdam.
The Frank family moved to Amsterdam in February 1934. Here she began her schooling and often played with her friends in the street. She lived a fairly trouble-free life here, but Hitler continued his plans for Germany. He began preparing the country for war in 1933. In 1938, the German army took control of Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia. When they invaded Poland in September 1939, England and France declared war. Yet their invasion continued and the German army reached the Netherlands on May 10, 1940. The Dutch government and royal family fled the country to live in England. After that, the bombing of Rotterdam on May 14th killed almost 1,000 people. The Netherlands finally surrendered. For the following year, most returned to their regular daily lives. They felt as if life changed very little under German control. People continued to work and attend school as usual. Jews, however, lived a very different life after the bombing. By the end of 1940, all Dutch people registered with the authorities. This was done so that Germans knew the addresses of all Dutch Jews. In November 1940, all Jewish civil servants were dismissed. In 1941, Dutch citizens were given identity cards. Those that belonged to Jews were stamped with a J. Non-Jewish people in the population did not oppose those new restrictions. Most in fear of the Germans' reactions, many stopped associating with Jews altogether.
Meanwhile, Anne was affected by the German control, just like the other Jews. 1941 was her last year in grade school. She later wrote, "There have been all sorts of Jewish laws. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. Jews were required to turn in their bicycles. Jews were forbidden to use streetcars. Jews were forbidden to ride in cars, even their own. Jews were required to do their shopping between 3 and 5 p.m. Jews were required to frequent only Jewish-owned barber shops and beauty parlors. Jews were forbidden to be out on the streets between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Jews were forbidden to go to theaters, movies, or any other forms of entertainment. Jews were forbidden to use swimming pools." Anne's life in hiding. In early July 1942, Anne and her father had a serious talk. In her diary, she wrote, "Daddy began to talk to us of going in hiding. He's very worried that it will be difficult for us to live completely cut off from the world. I asked him why on earth he was beginning to talk of that already. "Yes, Anne," he said. "You know that we have already been taking food, clothes, and furniture to other people for a year now." They continued their conversation, but the serious tone of her father's voice made Anne very anxious. She hoped that it would never happen. However, on July 5th, Margot came to Anne with horrible news. She said that she had received a call-up. Her sister said, "I picture concentration camps in lonely cells." But Margot would not have to leave, because the Franks would go into hiding. They left early in the morning, wearing layers upon layers of clothes to avoid being caught. The hiding place was above her father's office. She found it difficult at first to remain quiet during the daytime, because there was a store below. Later on, the Van Pelses moved in. This made life a bit less quiet and more fun for Anne. However, the lack of privacy was nerve-wracking for everyone living here. For the most part, the time Anne spent in the annex was anything but exciting. But there were also moments of fear and exhilaration. Every unexpected happening left them on edge. In November 1942, Fritz Pfeffer moved into the secret annex. At first, she enjoyed his company, but her opinion quickly changed and she had to share a room with him. While the Franks and company hid away in their tiny shelter, the war outside raged on. Underground newspapers were written and printed in secret to tell the truth about the war. Radio broadcasts also gave information not authorized by the Germans. By 1943, it was clear the Allies would win the war. But the people living in the secret annex struggled in their daily lives. They suffered from lack of sleep and often had a very small amount of food. On September 8th, they heard that Italy, an ally of Germany, had surrendered. This brought new hope for the end of the war, yet there was still more to come. The year ended, but the war did not. Anne was 14 now, and she realized how much life in the annex had changed her. Not only had she become more understanding, but she had become aware of her good and bad qualities. On June 6, 1944, the Allies invaded Normandy. It was a massive invasion and meant a lot for the war. She celebrated her 15th birthday on June 12th. The news about the war kept improving, and many were hopeful about the future. They believed the war was slowly coming to an end. Only 11 days later, Anne wrote the last entry of her diary. On August 4th, after 10 a.m., the German police invaded the secret annex.
Otto Frank returned to their tiny shelter to find Peter raising his hands, frightened.
5 men had entered the office building. One of them was wearing the uniform of the German police, and the others were most likely Dutch Nazis. They knew everything. The 5 men drew their revolvers and entered the secret door. Otto and Peter went downstairs when Peter was at gunpoint. There they saw the others, including Anne and Margot, with their hands raised.
Miep and Baptiste, who had assisted the Franks while they were in hiding, returned to the secret annex to find Anne's diary and many family photos. A week later, it was emptied out on German orders. Those from the secret annex were taken to 2 separate concentration camps for the women and the men. By now, the war was in the hands of the Allies. Forces approached from all directions. Many camps were cleared to erase the evidence of their crimes. Anne and Margot were taken away from their mother and transferred to a camp in Bergen-Belsen. Their mother only survived for another 2 months. Margot died in March 1945, and Anne only a few days later. Otto was the only one from the secret annex to survive the war. He returned to Amsterdam on June 3rd. While he had heard that his wife had died, he hoped that Anne and Margot, who had been transferred to a different camp, were still alive. 2 months later, he received word that they had died too. Miep gave the diary to Otto, who edited it and worked to publish it. Now, more than 50 years later, 30 million copies of her diary have been sold, and it has been translated into more than 65 languages. How did Anne take a stand in history? The Franks, like many other Jews, took a stand by resisting the German laws. While Hitler and the Nazi Party cruelly treated Jews, they went into hiding to escape a miserable life or death. Anne, throughout the war, didn't write with a harsh tone in her voice. Although she didn't speak much of the German laws, she did discuss her feelings about the war once writing. No one can keep out of the conflict. The entire world is at war. Today, the truth about the war is revealed through her story. The struggles of living during the Holocaust, of strictly staying in one building to survive, and to believe that such a legacy can be left by a teenage girl with nothing but creativity, truly remarkable.